Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be going through a list of fantasy works that have little to no romance. I want to make really clear the intention behind this, and it kind of has to do with the fact that it can be a little difficult nowadays to determine what exactly a book is offering. We have seen fantasy romance rise in popularity over the last few years, so in a sense it seems like the work has been done for us. If we want something with a big romantic element to it, we can just go to fantasy romance, and if we don't want that, we can just go to fantasy. However, there are a lot of books that exist in this middle area that is, by readers anyway, being called romantasy, and I think it's great that there is this bridge between these two sections. However, formally by publishers and marketing, you don't necessarily see that label, and also it could become a little ridiculous if we start having everything be hyper categorized, because then you almost would have the trope marketing thing but for book genres, and I don't think most of us want these hyper specific categorizations. That said, because we are having this sort of mix with fantasy and fantasy romance, there are entire conversations dedicated to when books feel like they're mismarketed, how sometimes even if you go to the fantasy section, even if you read the synopsis, and even if you're looking at reviews, sometimes what the book ends up being is extremely different from what you were looking for. And I think currently it's pretty easy to find something with a pretty big romantic aspect to it, but it is a lot harder to find the works that are emphasizing other aspects of the story. And there's nothing wrong with books that do have this heavy emphasis on romances. I think it's great to explore all different kinds of aspects of the human experience, and obviously romance is a big part of that for a lot of people, but we also want to sometimes examine other kinds of relationships, or we don't really want the emphasis to be on relationships at all. Sometimes we want to explore really interesting themes that have to do with political structures, religious institutions, really cool magic systems, and these what-if scenarios of what if our world looked like this. And so if you're somebody who that's sort of the camp you're in, where you feel like it's really difficult to determine what you're getting into, but you're wanting to find something like that, then hopefully this list will provide that for you. I have done a similar style video in the past, so I'll have that linked in the description bar if you're looking for more recommendations after this. And then also, if this is something that you would like to see more of, I'm happy to comb through the list of works that I've picked up and try to compile something again. So just let me know, I'd be happy to do it. But on that note, let's jump into the list of books. Kicking it off, we have the book Stormglass. This is something that I definitely am finding is relatively underhyped, and I cannot wait to continue on with the series because I am a sucker for something that feels like a hidden gem, but I also just really, really enjoyed it. I liked the way that the story unfolded, I liked the main character, and I liked the way that it was exploring the differences in class. So the setup for the story is you follow this young girl who has been living in what is essentially the slums of their world, and she has always dreamed of having a better life. And right at the beginning of the story, she finds herself desperately begging this one individual who kind of comes through and sees the horrendous circumstances that she and a bunch of other orphan children are living within. She goes to that man and says, please take me, please adopt me, please just get me out of here. And he finds himself incapable of not answering that plea, so he takes her under his wing, and he is somebody who does live a relatively privileged life, and he does hold a lot of power, and he is genuinely trying to use his position of privilege to help other people. But she starts to find herself living in a life that is certainly more luxurious than what her life was previously. However, she's also discovering some of the reasons behind why we find these distinct differences. And besides her, you actually do follow somebody who has always grown up in privilege. However, this other individual is being held to very extreme standards because her father and her mother, to some degree, feel like there's a chance that their daughter will hold even more power in the future, maybe even become the most powerful person in their country, and so they have very strict standards for her to a point where they don't allow her to interact with other children. They are, in a sense, keeping her from all other human contact besides them and whatever tutors they bring in, and she's very isolated and very lonely, and she's heard about this girl who was adopted from the slums, and she wants nothing more than to not only meet this girl, but become somebody who, if she does have power someday, understands her own people. So in the first book, you're exploring them at a young age, and you're watching them start to understand their environments as they grow older. And that is why I'm so excited to continue on with this series, because I can't wait to see how these characters progress in future installments. And I just in general thought that the way that it explored class differences was great, and I really, really loved the bond between our main character and the man that takes her in. I thought it was incredibly sweet. It was so wholesome. So this one, highly recommend. Really enjoyed that first book, and definitely not really an emphasis on romance. Next up, we have the book Dragon Mage. This one I have talked about quite often ever since I picked it up, because if you're looking for a story that really, really takes the time to develop a wonderful friendship, then this is the book for you. But additionally, it has really, really cool lore, and it is more suited for people that like epic fantasy, as the world is one that there is some kind of threat that you discover more about as you progress through the story, but this threat has forced a very difficult scenario for a lot of people. There are individuals who hold magic just in their very being, and they can't really do a whole lot on their own because it's only one person. However, you can actually use them to extract essence and grant that to sorcerers, who are people that don't hold their own magic, but they have the ability to use it. And it's much more useful to take this one person and make an army of sorcerers than it is to just leave that one person with their magic. And the reason that they want this is to try and fight back against this outside threat. And the reason that you start to get introduced to this concept is that you follow these two young boys, one who has these magical abilities and one who has immunity to magic. And people that have immunity to magic are also vital, as they are people who end up serving as protectors to sorcerers. So you follow these two young boys who are very good friends, they look out for each other, but they are these two extremes that a lot of powerful people want to use. And so you're watching them be ripped apart and come back together time and time again. You understand the reasons behind certain decisions, but you're also desperate for a better solution. And there's a lot of really fascinating world building aspects and lore to this story that I think is really fun. It's quite a chunky book, so if you're in the mood for epic fantasy with a great friendship and high stakes, this one's definitely got it. After that, we have The Bright Sword, and the idea behind this story, I'm sure most people are aware, but if you're not, it's basically what if we explored the other members of the Round Table that aren't necessarily the ones that are typically focused on. And it is almost like a collection of short stories to some degree, or almost like a collection of novellas, because we do spend a lot of time with these individual characters, and you are discovering their stories, the things that make them different, the things that ostracize them from the rest of the society, and why they felt so compelled to follow Arthur, and why they still feel compelled to follow Arthur, even when he's not necessarily somebody who is within their lives any longer. So that's the general idea behind it. I do think that this one, while of course there are references to certain characters maybe potentially caring about other people, romance by no means is the center of any of their stories, really. So it's almost like this one counts extra because it's like a lot of mini stories, none of which have an emphasis on romance. After that, we have the young adult story, City of Nightmares, and this is one that is certainly an acquired taste, as it's very quirky and very weird, and it also has a very morbid sense of humor. The idea behind the story is that you are looking at a society that the marketing described this as Gotham as far as what the city is like, and I think that's a fair way to describe it, but what if Gotham was plagued by the worst things within our nightmares? So there was some kind of event that occurred that made it so that the things that we dream about, specifically the things that we have nightmares about, have the ability to actually come into existence within this city. And ever since then, the society has figured out, luckily, how to push back against these nightmares. They make it so that everybody has to drink a specific thing that is within the tap water. If you don't drink this, then that is what's going to lead you to have nightmares again. They have entire task forces dedicated to fighting nightmares. And also, the task forces are broken up into individual sections depending on the kinds of nightmares that are the most common. So the main character of the story is somebody who lost her family to nightmares when she was a child, And ever since then, she has been horrifically traumatized. The book does explore PTSD, I think, quite well, but it does it within a really weird and quirky setting because there's a lot of humor and jokes, kind of dark humor, where the character, her means of protecting herself is to join this group that is basically like a cult. And she joins this group because she has a place to sleep and she's able to get away from nightmares. That's kind of all she wants. And then she's expected to try and recruit people into this cult by anytime somebody has been affected by a nightmare, this group is meant to go to those people and be like, oh, you should come join us. We're a group of people that have experienced nightmares before. And she doesn't really like her job. She really just does it because she likes getting a room to sleep in. And it does, I feel like it doesn't sound like it's funny. It probably sounds like it's really dark. But I promise the book has a lot of fun with its premise. If you like stories that aren't afraid to hold back with the weird and the morbid, then City of Nightmares might be something that you would enjoy. After that, we have Race the Sands, and this one does have a very, very, very minor romantic subplot that I actually thought was kind of sweet, but it is by no means something that takes over the story. In fact, it doesn't, I don't want to say too much about it, but it's not a fantasy romance. The setup for this story is always one where when I describe it, I always think, this doesn't sound like something I feel like a lot of us maybe would have our interest piqued by. And in fact, that's where I was for a long time, but I like this author's writing and I always felt like the world building was great and I'd heard good things. So I jumped into it and I was so pleasantly surprised because the more I read, the more interesting it got. The setup is that you follow this woman who has fallen on tough times and she's really struggling to provide a good life for her and her daughter. And then she ends up having a situation where her daughter might be taken away from her, so she's becoming very desperate. She also has a career in trying to coach people to race these beings known as Keyhawks. In their world, people become reincarnated, and based off of how they live their lives, when they're reincarnated, they can turn into various different things, but Keyhawks are the things people turn into when they were the worst of the worst people in society. So their society now races Keyhawks, and it's like this dangerous sport, and this main character is somebody who coaches young people for these races. And she ends up taking this girl under her wing who has experienced a lot of challenges within her personal life and her family. So she takes this girl under her wing. All of this is what I mean by, I don't know how many people think that this would sound like a compelling fantasy plotline, especially in a book form, because you're like, I mean, you can't really watch the races, so even that doesn't feel like it would have the same level of stakes. Not only does it have stakes, but everything starts to become so much bigger than you would ever expect. It has a mystery plotline within it, it has political intrigue. You start to follow a character who is almost like the emperor, and there are some reasons why they aren't sure about taking the throne just yet, and they're mourning the loss of their brother, and all this does end up being connected to the other plotline in really fascinating, fun ways. So it is just a whirlwind of a story. Keeps you guessing, keeps you on your toes. There's a lot of backstabbing. It's really good. It's really good, and it's really unexpectedly politically heavy. I know not everybody who watches this channel cares all that much about checking out stories from other mediums, but I do really quick for this last one want to mention a fantasy manga series. Any excuse to talk about the series I will take, but also it's really, really good, and it doesn't have an emphasis on romance, so it fits within the umbrella of books that we're talking about and stories we're talking about today, and that would be Hat Tillier. Yes, I'm talking about it again because it's so good. I do have a side channel where I go more in depth about other kinds of stories, whether they be manga, anime, video games, movies, TV shows. So if you're interested in hearing more about Hat Atelier, I'll have that channel linked. But the setup for this story is that initially you follow this young girl named Coco who has always dreamed about being able to use magic. However, it is understood in their world that if you aren't born with magic, you won't be able to use it. However, after witnessing somebody who comes through her village using magic, she becomes even further enamored with it, and she decides to try it for herself and discovers maybe everything she's been told and taught isn't necessarily true. However, this attempt at using magic does go horribly wrong, and now the same man who she witnessed using magic whisks her off to safety and decides to take her under his wing. He brings her to his atelier where he teaches other young girls how to become witches, and first off, He is great, and his dynamic with the little girls is so cute and so wholesome, and he has a friend who also comes through and he ensures that everybody's looked after, everybody's safe, everybody's okay, and these two are really good friends, and the little girls are all really sweet and cute except for one of them, but you're like, what's going on with her? Why is she so mean? I feel like there's something there. And just in general, the dynamics between them, it's great, but this story gets so much bigger than the first volume, and the first maybe couple volumes would make you believe, but also the thematic elements in this story are exceptionally well done, and I think by having both characters that are children and characters that are adults, you actually get to explore a very full range of different things in this story. One of the major themes is how adults shape children, and some of it is really heavy and really difficult to read. It's really, really good. I highly, highly recommend it. If you want to hear more about this story, like I said, I'll not only have my channel linked, but I actually did do a full in-depth discussion with one of my friends on his channel, so I'll have that discussion linked. And there's an anime that's going to be coming out soon, and I'm trying to get more people to get into this because it is phenomenal. And the artwork is stunning, and then also the magic is great. It's wonderful. It's such a lush fantasy world. I feel like it's everything that fantasy lovers want out of the creativity of what fantasy can do. It's got it. It's really good. I need more people to get into it. That's it though for a list of some fantasy works with little to no romance. I'll have all of these linked in the description bar in case you'd like to reference back to them or check them out for yourselves. If you have any of your own recommendations, feel free to leave those in the comments so that people don't just have the lists that I have, but your recommendations as well. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.